Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure to have you all here again. It's a great evening here in Australia, and this show that we talk about here today and that we always talk about, it's for all people around the world, because there's a few topics we'd like to discuss that talks about the UK and how absurd and controlling is this, guys. We get into the UK has just recently come out with this new law that says that 5-year-olds will be taught gay and trans classes, and opting out for parents is illegal. I mean, can you just imagine how insane this is? 5 or 10 years with this indoctrination on our kids, and also with that 5G horror show that's been coming up lately. I assure everybody listening, if we don't fight back against this, for our future's sake and for our kids' sake, to be exposed to this just lunacy and technology from the top elites trying to control our minds, of this 5G insanity. Just an example of how insane the 5G gets. When they're trying to control people's minds and put voices in people's heads. I mean, there was an example in Japan about the holographic kind of screens you'd see on shops, for window shops and stuff like that. And apparently people that would be walking past would hear voices in their heads telling them about advertising and trying to advertise from the shops. You know, a few people complained about that. But what that really goes to show is another example was in the Gulf War in Iraq. Supposedly they'd use that kind of technology of putting voices in people's heads, and so what they did was they used that on the Iraqi soldiers and put the voice of Allah in their heads, telling them to drop their weapons and surrender. So they did that and they were firebombed from that. But what that shows is like the kind of technology that they use. That's what's happening with the 5G upcoming stuff. They're using military grade kind of technology, and the stuff that they use in wars. And very concerning stuff, guys. The radiation and the antennas and stuff. Very not good for our health as well. But they don't really put the health concerns into consideration. They completely ignore that. This Orwell utopia, it's coming into place, kids. And if you read that 1984 Orwell's book, there's a lot of examples of how the kids ultimately turn on the parents, and you know, for any kind of sus activities the parents discussing between one another, you know, talking about the government or whatever. You know, the kids are actually privileged and given all sorts of stuff from the government to dob on their parents. But that 5G stuff, it's all sorts of stuff that's very concerning. I mean, apparently there was another kind of attachment to it that can, so it can get into your eyelids as well, like the microwave kind of radiations that come out of it get into your eyelids, and they can irritate the inside of your eyelids, you know, cause a lot of scratching and, you know, severe scratching and stuff. Truly worrying stuff, and I urge everybody to research it. If you don't believe me, just search up the whole 5G concept and you'll surely find something. And a lot more into that later. I'd like to introduce my next guest, a truly fine researcher and a good friend of mine, willing to step up and fight back against the corrupt government and the establishment that we live in today and all this madness and the influences that 5G do. They'll be coming to Australia as well. All these influences from 5G, and the UK is an example where they're telling allowing 5-year-olds and below that age to learn about trans and gay studies and opting out for a parent is illegal. All this madness is coming here in Australia too. I mean, in October last year, if you look at what happened in Tasmania when gender was removed on birth certificates, I mean, the Labor government are definitely pushing for this stuff. Well, the latest of this kind of stuff, where schools in New South Wales will soon be taught Aboriginal English in new curriculum. So they'll be taught phrases like sister and brother and cousin stuff. I mean, it just shows like that episode of the Simpsons with the re-education centre, where they pretty much controlled everyone's thoughts and shaped it into one singular narrative. Well, if you don't believe it or not, we don't want to be re-educated. And Jacinta Price, the Aboriginal activist, just came out saying how absolutely ridiculous this is, and saying that those words have no association in Indigenous culture. So I'd like to introduce my next guest, Clint. Clint, how are you this afternoon?
I'm very well. Yourself?
Yeah, good, thanks, man. So while we get into this New South Wales question, I'll have a question for you in a moment. But so if you haven't seen with the police force, the New South Wales Police Force on Facebook, they've been posting some weird statuses and stuff. Just the other day, they had some weird status. It was some Lady Gaga reference, but it had a Lady Gaga hashtag, and it was just a really kind of lefty kind of status, to be honest. But they're also like launching the Mardi Gras in March. Just some weird behaviour. Hashtagging the Oscars and all that other, PC garbage that they're trying to push down everyone's throats. Also, like hanging a pride rainbow flag outside the headquarters. If you saw that, just some strange behaviour. But what's very concerning as well is that this kind of behaviour is also happening with the CIA in the States. They're also on Twitter promoting the Black Panther movie and hashtagging the Oscars. And when you look at it, how deeply involved the CIA really is with Hollywood. Many actors have been revealed recently. Many actors and film directors have recently just been revealed to be CIA agents. And the US Department of Defense said this in a tweet. That so firstly, the US Department of Defense hashtags the Oscars. Then it says, did you know the Department of Defense works with Hollywood to ensure military is correctly portrayed in films? So what's your take on this, Clint, and the New South Wales Police, the CIA?
Well, Nathan, thanks for having me on again. You've covered like so many issues in such a short space of time, but we'll rewind back to the first one, which was about children in the UK being as young as 5 being taught about transgenders and gays and lesbians and stuff is very extreme. I mean, I don't think transgenders and gay and lesbian issues I think is obviously absurd and really inappropriate for children of that age to be learning about such things. But it's a sign of the times of the indoctrination which is going on within the education system, which they really should just be teaching kids about their ABC and basic mathematics at that age. But instead they're imposing all these social agendas, which it really is quite perturbing. I mean, if you look back historically, and everyone always likes to quote Hitler on something or other, but Hitler once said that, I don't care. Basically, I'm summarising here, but he basically said, I don't care where you stand on if you like National Socialism or not. Give me one generation with your children, and they'll be National Socialists.
Mm.
And so I think this is part of the this agenda, this Fabian agenda, to indoctrinate society for future generations. And then, as you also mentioned in the so far about mind control and what's been going on with mind weapons and various other techniques to get people to either consume or kill. I mean, that's nothing new. Like MK Ultra and mind control was largely experimented with in World War II, and then later by the CIA in America and stuff. Fortunately, I don't know very much about 5G, but I'm still keen to learn. And then, in relation, you mentioned the New South Wales government, New South Wales Police here in Australia, tagging Lady Gaga and other. What else did they tag?
They hashtag the Oscars, and CIA been having a lot of the same strange behaviour as well.
I think this is a message that to get, it's almost like big daddy government, or is drumming up business. They're on demand. It's like it's reinforcing people, like if you've got any sort of social problems that are happening in your life, remember the police are just a phone call away. And I think it's just drumming up business for them, drumming up arrests, drumming up cases to get people in private run jails.
Yeah,
jails are a business. The more people that they can get in there, the more profitable they become for their shareholders. If they could be privately run, but either way, it's almost like it's just I think it's basically drumming up business and showing, but they shouldn't be doing it. I disagree with it, because I think the police should be impartial. They're just policy enforcers of the laws of the state, and they shouldn't be meddling in social issues.
Oh yeah, and Hollywood affairs as well. They are CIA.
Yeah.
It's complete lunacy. Yeah, there's another topic I wanted to get into, Clint. So we've seen the Yellow Vest week 15. It had a lot more of a turnout than week 13, which was good, but big turnout for this one, a few 100,000. But and we just look back at what happened on that week 15. We're nearing into week 16 at the moment as well. But there's a huge breakout fight between police and the Yellow Vesters, where the Yellow Vesters were throwing bricks at Riot Police, and Riot Police were, firing tear canisters back to them, and it just had this tiny little skirmish between protesters and police. Another good incident that happened that week, so there was a group of Yellow Vesters that took over and are now, so they're squatting in this giant government-run fitness centre. So they've taken that over, the government fitness centre, but what they're doing is they're housing at least 150 homeless families. So what we see from the brink of this, what's happening, France and most of Europe, they are slowly heading towards a revolution. We've seen with Frexit, from Brexit and other groups against the EU. Even here, there were huge turnouts across Australia. It shows that the people are waking up, and, they just can't ignore this anymore. France will eventually overthrow these large institutions, or it will get very bloody. Hopefully, or unfortunately, but possibly, that should spark a response from neighbouring nations from France. Where do you think this will lead?
Well, I think it's positive development. I think the people, if the Yellow Vest movement is actually starting to assume some of the responsibilities of the French government, like you mentioned, then the Yellow Vest movement are actually providing shelter and food and water for homeless French people. That's a good step in the right direction. It's a step in the direction, like, we're not only a protest movement, but we're also now a movement that's looking after the most vulnerable people in France. And the more that they can take on those sorts of roles of government, I think the stronger the movement will become.
Definitely shows a good sign of what's happening.
Absolutely.
I'd like to get into this other topic. David Icke's free speech being taken away when the Australian government revoked his visa and cancelled his tour. I think it was in March. But if this doesn't come to anybody's surprise, there was a Labor candidate named Josh Burns. He did a public appearance calling for David Icke to be banned. And get this, because he is campaigning for Holocaust denial to be taught in schools. You know, so you expect that from Josh Burns. But there was also other attacks from the Anti-Defamation League. You know, not surprising. But, of course, David Icke denies saying this. This isn't very surprising. Tommy Robinson was recently banned on Facebook and Instagram. You know, not that I agree with everything that David Icke says, but this is very controversial. We're losing our rights to freedom. What are your thoughts on David Icke?
Well, David Icke's quite a character. I don't agree with everything he says, but I will defend to the death his right to say it. And I think freedom of speech is fundamental to any representative democracy, any constitutional democracy. We need the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. Those 4 freedoms should be upheld. You know, short of yelling fire in a packed movie theatre, people should be able to say what they want. And it's up to the individual if they want to listen to David Icke or not. I think it's a slippery slope and a dangerous position for the government to take, to ban people from fucking speaking.
We've seen John Peterson had a few angry protesters and stuff following him around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're just... Freedom of speech is basically fundamental, like with the other 4 freedoms. And people should be outraged about it. And we all have Alexander's library in our pockets these days. It's never been easier to lobby politicians. It only takes a second to get on your phone and Google the email address of the Minister for Foreign Affairs or the Minister for Home Affairs or whoever is making these decisions on banning people from speaking. We can all get on there and just write a 1-word sentence, and that is like, let David Icke speak, or let whoever speak. And I won't be voting for you if you don't let him speak. If everyone did this, it only takes a few minutes. It's not like you have to sit down and pen a letter, put it in the mail, and just do it immediately on your phone.
Well, of course, David Icke denies all these allegations of being an anti-Semite and all that kind of stuff. He does really focus a lot on Zionism, so...
Well, yeah, if this Labor candidate's quoting that, David Icke's
and the Anti-Defamation League, they've got some history.
Yeah, and about Holocaust denial. I mean, if they, in some parts of the world, it's illegal, like Austria, for example. It's illegal. If you deny the Holocaust, you go to jail. I mean, Voltaire said, if you want to know who rules over you, simply find out who you're not allowed to criticise.
Yeah. Alright, well, there's one last thing I wanted to get into before we finish this up. So, on the last show, we were talking about the space as fake conspiracy, NASA, pretty much rigging all space footage and all that since they first formed in, I think it was 1954. But when I look back at the audio that we last did on the video, I think a lot of the audio was cut from the conversation, so I'll just get into what we were talking about last time. It basically goes on about how that all NASA space information since 1958 that was formed by one of Hitler's right-hand man. He also directed 6 moon missions, and when he died, he told his assistant that the fake alien invasion is coming. So that's one of Eddie Bravo's theories. Also, that the faking of Roswell was a diversion, a CIA diversion, and this alien invasion will scare everyone into a one-world government. That's the theory. But then when you look at Operation Paperclip, where NASA brought over 34,000 Nazi scientists, and how Hitler supposedly created the EU. The Nazis created flying saucers and was in contact with aliens. all these other types of similarities. So Alex Jones came on the Joe Rogan podcast. He gave a very interesting theory about, NASA building a breakaway civilization where, as to say that they don't want to run the planet, but siphon off resources and build a new advanced system. He says there was two breakaway shadow governments, NASA and the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. He then says that the US merged with the British Empire in the 1930s and a whole bunch of other crazy topics that they got into. What's your take on that, Clint?
To start with, Operation Paperclip was, I didn't know it was that amount, that many scientists, 34,000. But there sure was a lot. The most famous one was von Braun, who went on to work for NASA and with rocketry science and physics and all that sort of stuff. But as for like a breakaway civilization, there's a couple of good historians, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell and the late Jim Mars, who both wrote extensively about a possible breakaway civilization, coming from the fact that the Third Reich was far more advanced in physics and rocketry and all manner of things, to the point where when the ones that weren't captured by the United States or the Russians at the end of the war fled to Argentina, and with the loot of Europe, the Vatican helped them out, and they all went to Argentina, where they could continue their scientific research with ample amounts of funds. And then so I don't think space is fake, but I do think about the Roswell crash. My theory is that it wasn't a UFO, it wasn't a spacecraft, it was a Nazi aircraft that crashed. And it was almost like a shot across the bow at the Americans and the Allies, saying, "Look, we're still continuing our research. We're down here in Argentina. We're far more advanced than any of the physics that you have." And so I don't know. So it's a really interesting topic. But those two authors, if listeners want to know more about it, they're two really good books to read. Is Nazi International by Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, and The Rise of the Fourth Reich by Jim Mars. Two good books to read on.
Yeah, Alex Jones uses a lot of examples from Churchill's memoirs. I know you've been reading that too. Can you give me any examples, maybe, or interesting takes on that?
Well, yeah, Churchill changed a lot over his political career, from some of his writings about Zionism in 1920 to beating the drum for war against Germany in the late 30s. I think again, we're only taught the history that they want us, that the ruling elites want us to believe, because we won the war. However, Churchill said, "History shall be kind to me, for I shall write it." But I think it would have been a very different story had the Allies lost. And I think a good balanced take on the Second World War and Churchill and Hitler and the start of the war in particular is done by David Irving. But as soon as you mention David Irving, you're called an anti-Semite.
Anti-Semite.
Yeah. So, it's the way it is. I think it just comes down to people doing their own reading, free from the conditioning, the educational conditioning.
Well, I've said in a recent video, I don't know if anybody's seen it, that the Balfour Declaration that was formed in, I think, 1901 when Israel first formed as a nation.
No, 1916.
1916.
Yeah.
Yeah, they first formed as a nation, you know, got rid of Palestine and etc. But also that it was very Rothschild influenced, and that I think they wrote the Declaration, the Rothschilds, and we know that those bankers and stuff like that. But you heard the recent one that that the Israeli killings of the Palestinians at the Gaza protests last year, they may amount to war crimes. There was a UN inquiry. So there was 189 Palestinians were killed, 6,100 wounded. They also said the Palestinian demonstrators, they did not pose an immediate threat of death or serious injury to the others that they were shot by.
Yeah, it's absurd. How long do these, like Gaza is the biggest open-air prison in the world. You know, it's only a tiny stretch of land, only a couple of miles wide, and I think about 12 miles long, or maybe 20 kilometres long, something like that. And it's the largest open-air prison in the world, and it's just it's absolutely appalling that these Palestinians have to live in such atrocious conditions at the hands of these fascists, pressures. You know.
Yeah, David, I compared Gaza Strip at the moment to a concentration camp.
It is a concentration camp, you know. And, you know, you'd think, you know, after all the Jews supposedly went through during the Second World War, they'd have a bit more empathy, a bit more compassion. But they don't.
So, yeah, just to elaborate on a lot of stuff with the UK, new laws trying to be passed where they're trying to teach 5-year-olds and younger about gay and trans studies, and it's illegal for parents to take them out of that, and all that other kind of examples that I gave regarding Australia and Tasmania. And
I think it's time to homeschool your kids.
Yeah.
You know? If that's the sort of stuff that's going to be in the curriculum, it's time to homeschool your kids. And a lot of schools are just they just need to focus on basics. Teach their kids proper English and maths and science and geography and history, and forget about these social issues. It's not going to do the kids any good.
Yeah, it's really time that the police take their job more seriously, especially in Victoria. They're arming up all the guards, you know, to the shit house, but, you know, can't seem to tackle any real crime, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think we'll cut it there, guys. Thanks for everyone for listening, and I really hope that you all learned something from this. We'll be having Clint's appearance again soon. Thanks for joining, Clint.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
And everyone listening, research anything that we've talked about. I urge you all to have an open mind and take a look at everything that we've talked about. All these issues, they're coming to Australia. 5G Wi-Fi, it's coming. Military-grade technology. So our next guest should be very good, and I hope all you guys have a good week, and talk to you all soon.